We're going to learn the third Sikha in Pashas Balak, Chelek Yud Ches. B'shaychus Sipper in dem Siyum von unser Zedra, v'hinei ish memnei Yisrael bo, v'yakar v'elecho es amidyonis la'ini meisha, the Tzelem Chazal, the Gemara brings down Sanhedrin, concerning this pasuk, as immer ben Solo had the midyonis kosi v'basur gebracht von Meisha Rabbeinu, und geteinet zu Asura im Eteres, v'im temer Asura bas Yisrael mi yitira lecho. Salma men from Mesha Halacha, based as Pinchas Ro Ma'aser v'Nisker Halacha, Habelas Hakusis Kanoim Pegabei. In other words, Bazimba ben Solo came with a time to Mesha Rabbeinu Mamanvshich. All Kozi of Asur is Muteres to me, just like Bas Yisrael is Muter to you. Or if Bas Yisrael, if Kozi of Asur is also to me, why did you marry? What permission did you have? What heter did you have to marry Bas Yisrael? Why was she taking mutter? Is Rashi Masber? Rashi says like this: that Moshe came to Matan Torah, and also he married her before Matan Torah. Shenit na Torah kulam b'nei they were all Matan Torah. They were all b'nei neach. B'meila, there was no problem marrying each other. Then by Matan Torah, nicht so klal mitzvahs, they all entered the covenant of mitzvahs. V'hiyamon tzipari was with them. Das heißt, Moshe was in Tzipera, weil them who found Matan Torah and alle euch the Bnei Yisrael given and get it from Bnei Neach, and therefore they're allowed to marry each other before Matan Torah, and that's when he married her. Und danach bei Matan Torah hat sich euch Tzipera megayt, when zusammen mal mit alle Jiden Tzipera also converted with all the Jews. B'meile, on the far is the euch danach Muteres Moshe, he can continue being with her because they all converted. Before we go further in Pnim, just a point of order 4 and order 5, the Rebbe, in connection with what says in the Pnim that after Matan Torah they were all misgayer, the Rebbe brings that the Yad Ramah does not learn it from Gedus. The Yad Ramah learns that it's not Torah but it's Chach Halacha, that the whole concept, the whole halacha that you're not allowed to marry Amidyonis only came after Matan Torah. So before Matan Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu did absolutely nothing wrong. That's why he was allowed to continue on being with her as well. The next, the hard is 5. The Rebbe brings out from the Lashon of Rashi, which the Rebbe brings in the Pnim, is also mashma, like the Yad Ramah, because the Rashi only says v'nich nesu l'chlal mitzvahs. It doesn't mention anything about geirus. They only entered into the mitzvahs, which would mean to say nit nateir v'nischach halacha. And if you're going to say that Rashi learns like Yad Ramah, so what's going to be the continuation of the Sikha and Sif Beis? What the Rebbe is going to explain over there, ask over there, does not apply. There's no more question. But the Rebbe says that when the Gay B'nai Yisrael, that even to B'nai Yisrael, the Gemara says in the Gemara, Rebbe inside the Yevomis and Krisis, that the Yidden also were misgayen. B'nai Yisrael, even if you're going to say that the Yidden themselves did not have any from Gainus, concerning Tzipeda, the Bas Yisrael for sure has to have a from Gainus. Why? First of all, she was a Bas Yisrael not from the descendants of Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov, as we think right now. Also see a little later, maybe a little different. But in the Bible, she's not from Bnei Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov. In addition to this, she was also not in Eretz Mitzrayim, in Golus Mitzrayim. But Mela over there in Golus Mitzrayim was the beginning of the Geirus. But Mela Bebelt, she was not in Vihaisis, in Eretz Mitzrayim. That's why she needs a proper Geirus. So Bemela, L'chaira is mashma that it makes it's understood that Bapash, according to Rashi, she went through a propagators. The Yidos went through a well, Kabbalah for sure, Tzipera went through a propagators. But mainly the Rebbe goes back. Ebazei is nishmuven. Zimri doch given a nasi base of Lashemeni. Zimri was a nasi of base of Lashemeni. And the Rebbe brings down an order 6. Interesting that two Rashis once say, the end of Pashas Balak and the beginning of Pashas Pinchas. In one place, Rashi says that he was a nasi of the whole Shevet. And in one place, it says he was only a nasi of a base of in the Shevet Shimon. Al Kaponim, back to the Pnim, he was a nasi base of the Shimon. So he was a lam. So he knew how to learn. He was a nasi. What was his comparison, his story to Moshe Rabbeinu's story? He was a nasi. He didn't know the Chelek, a simple difference between the suing from Matan Torah or noch Matan Torah. So what's his? How did he approach what with the Tainei? It's on the other hand, the Rebbe says, if you can find some kind of explanation, but you'll find some kind of explanation for what the Chelek canal is, nicht getan maspik, to Mathe sein, Mathe machen, was Yisrael Mesh. If you can find some kind of explanation why the difference between Matan Torah and after Matan Torah does not justify Mesh's action, is noch ganz schwer. For was gefindt man nicht in Gemara as Mesh or the limits are anders. So left have the time for Zimri. Klappe Mesh Rabbeinu. The time Klappe Mesh Rabbeinu is a gewaltige time. If you accept that there is no difference between former Matan Torah and after Matan Torah. So why doesn't it say anywhere explanation? How did Mesh Rabbeinu do such a thing? Pinchas hat bloß gesagt, der Halacha Abel Aram is, was is the gate to Meise Zimri, but nobody is explaining Moshe Rabbeinu's actions if that does not make sense. And if it does make sense, so what's the time for Zimri? What it's just common sense? The Sinodom Forschung, Rebbe brings down there are some commentators that say, as das Gufe der Chelek canal zwischen Matan Torah, nothing about Matan Torah is Alma Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu himself forgot this water between before Matan Torah and after Matan Torah. Aber, the Rebbe says, nois of them, was Rashi sagt befehlish und Saman la halacha shenemar lebesinai, abel kusis as blois di halacha, was for an enishes kommt is alma memeno. That means, in other words, that Rashi clearly learns that Moshe Rabbeinu never forgot this common understanding that there's a difference between Matan Torah and after Matan Torah. And they should have godel to sagen mechlalas. It's in the Shalom confirmation as aposh the Chelek canal. It doesn't make sense to say that Moshe Rabbeinu forgot such a simple chiluk. And the Rebbe says in order 10, you can say Moshe Rabbeinu had to forget and knows that a Pinchas should get his reward. It's enough that Moshe Rabbeinu forgot the halacha kanoim pagan bay, but he doesn't have to forget the simple svara of the difference between Matan Torah and after Matan Torah. In addition to both these things in this movement, even if you're going to say not except these two times, and you can say yes, Moshe Rabbeinu did forget. The Rebbe asked Shaila, hat then gekent verlassen, hat sich an Zimri gefällt Shaila, hat sich then gekent verlassen, als von Moshe wird mit allen werden der Chelek zwischen Matan Torah und noch Matan Torah. Let's assume that Moshe Rabbeinu forgot. But Zimri never, why should he think that Moshe Rabbeinu is going to forget? We're back to the first question. If Zimri never thought so, and it doesn't make sense that Moshe Rabbeinu forgot, so it's a simple chiluk between before Matan Torah and after Matan Torah, and it doesn't make sense to say that Moshe Rabbeinu forgot. So, but the shaila is, what was Zimri's time over here? The Chanosi, what kind of silly time is he coming to Moshe Rabbeinu? See, ways the Rebbe continues on, and he says like this: Ich darf ihn verstehen. Der Din ist, als Gejeres ist Asura la Kehin, und das ist der Nisse min HaTeira. Kehin is not a lot of matter Gejeres. Hagam die Gemara in Kedushin, lernt es auch von Apostel in Yecheskel, which is Nevi'im, it's not Divrei Teira. And the question is, you learn out, Asura min HaTeira min, on Nevi'im, the Gemara says, Divrei Teira min Divrei Kabbalah Le'alfi. Not maybe? Is the snor was also Yecheskel Asmucha Akra. Aber das ist ein Issum in der Teira, Mamashedeman, Isha Zeno Leikoch. This will be the Rambam Paskins. The Rebbe brings down that even the Ravid who argues and holds that you learn out from the Pasik of only a Pasik Yecheskel, he still agrees, as the Rebbe is assigned to another place in the Ravid that is Minatei. The reason for it is, why is a Kohen not allowed to marry Isha Zeno and a Goya? Mishum lefi shebo min ha'akum hashtufim bizim. They're full of zima. Now, the Gemara, the Rebbe continues on. In the Gemara is da plukte wegen Moshe Rabbeinu. The Gemara is Wochen der Rebbe is mit sein, Machlekes. Leit ein day as Moshe Rabbeinu Kein Godel. Moshe Rabbeinu was a Kein Godel. Weil poske kunne ele mezadish shel Moshe, but he himself was a Kein Godel. Und das zweite day halt, as leit in the sky in Moshe, ele shivis yimei hameluim belabadi, was only a Kohen for the 7 days of Yibishibas Yimei. According to these 2 days, according to both days, he was a Kohen. If so, it's kosher. If you say that that a Geyer is also like Kohen, is v'azeh is Bas Yisrei, which we said before, was a Geyer is Gibem Teres Suim, so therefore, he was not allowed to marry her at all. And the Rebbe continues on. Look, man de Omer, as Leidens Kain Meshel Shivisi Mehamuim Bilaban. According to that man, that he was a kohen only for the 7 days. But when you can't enter in Nakabon Bedechik, you could have said because of the Bedechik that Moshe is Echid Dan nicht when can kohen gomor. In other words, being that it was only for 7 days, the Kahuna was not mamish a full-fledged Kahuna. And those was that gemerkt makliv sein. Why was he allowed to bring the Kabbonis in the Shuvas Yimei Meluim if he wasn't a full-fledged Kohen? Is the Stefan, weil wie Tesis is Masbira, the Shuvas Yimei Meluim oder Mishkin hat din Boma. Und der Fall, the Shimish Meshe, Bishivas Yimei Meluim echol Klovan, nicht mehr big the Kona, weil big the Kona beboma. And therefore, that's why he was allowed to, was only a din Boma, not on the Mizbeach, and therefore he was allowed to as well. And the Far, according to this, if he wasn't a full-fledged Kohen, the Far is Eich Bas Yisrei, Agiyed, is not given also. According to this, you could say, according to this man, being that he wasn't a full-fledged Kohen, therefore he was allowed to marry a Giyedis, because the did Kohen Giyedis is only for a full-fledged Kohen. But the Rebbe says, Levad Zeis was from the Lashon HaGemara Leiniskayin Mesh. The Lashon HaGemara they became a Kohen. Miz Mashma, Mishivas Yem Moim Luyim, is a Gemen a Kohen Gadol, a Kohen Gomer. That's Mashma in the Lashon HaGemara, in Lashon HaGemara. Even if you're going to say that according to this man, the Omer Hitaka was not a full-fledged Kohen, like Abishvel, if man the Omer as Meshi called Yom of Kohen Hoyo, that he was a Kohen all his life. If he was a Kohen all his life, he was a full-fledged Kohen. If the Kasha comes back, how was he permitted to marry a Giyedis, which are also located? So before we continue on further in the Pnim, let's address a few of the ha'oros over here. In the Pnim, the Rabbi asked the question, if you can say Moshe Rabbeinu was a Kohen in the beginning, according to both opinions, whether he was a Kohen from a regular Kohen or only Shivas Meluim, is kosher. The Rebbe says, "V'azoi is bas yisri given b'teres tzugim zidach given agiyedus." In other words, the question is not just because she was a giyedus, more so because she was bas yisri. What's the deal dafka bas yisri? So the Rebbe says in Order 20 that if she would not have been considered, if she would have not been a bas yisri, so even though by Matan Torah all the Yidden one is gayer, as we said in the beginning, right? Still, you must say that gather of Giyedis of all Yidden does not make a Kohen also be Giyedis in this type of a Giyedis. So the best Raya the Rebbe says is from Elazar, Aaron, Elazar, Ibonot, Yisomar. They were all Nizgayer. Everybody was Nizgayer. And we don't find anywhere that they had to divorce their wives. It doesn't say anywhere. And the reason the Rebbe says is very simple, because being that every one of them was from the Bnei Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, but Mele, the reason which the Rambam brings, the Gemara brings down before, because the Goyim come Shtufim Bezimo, doesn't apply to them because they're not from the Goyim, they're not from the Umas Olam, they're from the Bnei Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. But Mele, the Kasha is only because she's a Bas Yisrael, so she's not, as we mentioned before, from Bnei Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. As the Rebbe mentioned before already in the Ha'orah 6, not from Ne'av, she was Bas Yisrael. And therefore, this gather of Giyedis makes the question, she's from Bas Yisrael, and Yonis, therefore, she should be also to okay. Then the Rebbe goes on and he says, the Shaila could have been answered based on Tzafas Penech and Sanhedrin, the La'acha Matan Torah, the Nasu Yehudim Lemafreya. In other words, it's not a gather of Giyedis, B'chlal. Giyedis is only Mekana Lahaba. But after Matan Torah, the Yidden became Lemafreya. They were never going. They were always Yid. V'mela, it's not a gather of Giyedis. The Rebbe goes more. There's another Nekuda that Midyon, Kibim Shehem Gam Kim Zer Avram Lachar Amila, as it says in Parshas Chayesara, Vayesef Ketura, Vayesef Avram, Vayikach Isha Shmo Ketura, and one of the children is Midyon. Come to Chois, that Midyon is from the children from Avram Yitzchak, Avraham. But from after the Milah, Vayesef Avram Ishma Ebazei, and Vayimam this guy, no? And their mother of Midyon was this guy. Ketura was his Hagar was this guy, no? Ja, oh, sie misgeiru have Yisrael mafreya. If they're going to be Megayer, it's like Avraham Yitzchak Yankov. They're Gomel mafreya, as we said in the first part of Savas Baneach. V'zet tzepera. This is the tzepera. Evazei, according to this, is Muteretz Zakosher Shibufnim, because Evazei, she is also from children of Avraham, and therefore doesn't apply for her this issue of Gieris to the Kain. She's a different Geder of Gieris. Another Nukuda that the Rebbe says in Ha'oret 25, when the Gemara, what the Rebbe brings down over here, that the B'shivasi and that from the Lashon Gemara in the sky Meisha is mashma at the B'shivasi Mei Amluim he was a Kain Gomor. So the Rebbe says in his Mitzayin to Korach Chelek Vov and the orders over there that the Rebbe says that the Kahunas Meisha was only a toyer of Kahuna, but not the Indian of the Kachi Lachanim. Ebazei, this goes to what we said before, L'chaira. If so, it was not a Kain Gomor, we said before. But the Rebbe says, even though it doesn't apply to him, the Indian Lekachi Lachanili, this Moshe Rabbeinu, the Torah Moshe Kuna, which explained the Chelek Vav over there, is enough to say that it's also Begieres. Why? Because a Gerusha is Asur L'Kayin, even a Balmum She'ein Bei She'edis the Kahuna. Even though there's no avoida is also, but if so, same thing also with Gabi Moshe Rabbeinu. Ha'ara 27, which is also very nice Ha'ara, the Rebbe says, the Shaila is L'chayr Sofkal Sof, according to the Manda Omar, who holds he was a Kain all his life. How was he married to Tzipora? How did he marry to Bas Yisrael? And the Rebbe says, L'chayr was and you Efshel Talents al derech Tirutz Hashas, the Meisha Zorhu le'inyan negoyim, ki shani maris negoyim da'ar nevon of ksuvim beparsha. Mora says that Moshe Rabbeinu, even if he was a kohen, even if he was a kohen kol yomo, the gabe the inyan of looking at negoyim, Moshe Rabbeinu was considered a zor. Why? Because in the Parshas negoyim says are nevono. In other words, it has to be not stam kahuna. It has to be a kahuna from ar nevono. Even if we can say Moshe was a kohen, but it was not a kohen from Aaron Bonov. Therefore, the Indian from Gileas Negoim, which the Torah says it has to have, Aaron Bonov doesn't apply to it. Where it says that a kohen is not allowed to marry a Zeno, a Isha Zeno. In other words, the Isha of Shtufim Bezima applies to kohen. Also says that the Pasuk Emer la Kohen and Bnei Aaron. So it's not just Stam Koyanim. So even if Moshe Rabbeinu was Taka Koyanim, even Kol Yomov, still he's not from Bnei Aaron, therefore it does not apply to him. Therefore you could have answered like that. Zok the Rebbe, Avol Yesh L'Chalek. The Rebbe says, a Gewaldige Chak in the Pshat in the Gemara. Yediu Kashas, Aaron Avon of Ksuvim B'Parsha, that the Negoyim, why is Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't have the din of Negoyim? Why he can't see the Negoyim? Because it says Aaron Bonov is not because it says Aaron Bonov, because it says Aaron and afterwards Bonov. B'meila means that the Bonov have to come from Aaron. Mashenkin when the pasuk in Emer Lakein Bnei Aaron says two things: Emer Lakein and Bnei Aaron. So b'meila Ibazai, the Koyanim, even if they're not Bnei Aaron, can also be those who have the isur of what he call it of Ishas. The Rebbe is Mamshech in Siv Gimel. He says, "L'chayre, but you can't sagen that the zwei Shales and now Siv Alpha Beis when vernempfet Evers V'chav." That these two first questions, what's the heter for Moshe Rabbeinu, and why did Zimri B'chlal have a question if it's such a simple answer? And the second question, how is a Kohen muter? How is Moshe Rabbeinu muter b'Bas Yisrael shidduch giyeres? Is one answers the other. Which Rebbe says, "Amit the time the Bas Yisrael miyetirulcho when Zimri came with that time, but Zimri taki gemeint nicht the Misa from Chitn mit der Amois, not how are you married at Amois." The answer that is very simple, and Zimri also knew it. Chelek before Matan Torah and after Matan Torah. The Isser is no the Isser von Geyeres Lekoyen. Und die Scheiche zwischen dem Isser mit dem was am Midyonis is Asura. Ebazei. Why did he come to the Indian from Midyonis? Why did he come by the town of Midyonis? The Shaila is misad von Stufen Bezima. Im Thema zu Asura Basisrachla is in them, was der Tamer is of Geras Lakain, this canal, wie Shabbat Malachim Ashturfim Bezimo. Das heißt, ob the Minyanis is Asura. Why? Why? Because she's Aramois, and if she's talking becomes in the nation, which is talking Bezima, Ebazei, Basis is the also von Aramois. Ebazei, she's coming also and saying, how will she become Mutter Lakain? So, this answers both questions. Zimni Takanu. That the Isel Chitun to marry a goy stam, no problem, because it was before Matan Torah, and therefore this is not his time. Therefore, nobody even had to answer anything, because this is not what his time. His time was the second time. How would you marry her? You're a kohen. A kohen is not allowed to marry a giyeris, b'frat giyeris that comes from the midyonis. But maybe we don't have both questions answered. The Rebbe, but if he's bleibt schwecken als if leader, you say. But say the caution remains the other way around. Boss is stuck at the shuba of the time. If the shaila is here is more stuck at the answer, or the answer shaila is noch mehr for was the man for nicht gesagt to me why nobody said this answer, which is going to justify Moshe's actions to Zimri. Before we continue on further, Receive Dalet. Let's just address Order 28. The Rebbe over here is going to try to explain how we can answer the two questions which he was finished off. That if Taka the time of Zimri is Gabi Giyonis Lakayeh, not Gabi the actual marriage, what's Taka? The first question is what's Taka the answer on this question? How did Taka Moshe Rabbeinu, who was a Kohen, marry a Giyonis? And the second question is why don't we find anybody anywhere that there was anybody answering it to Zimri? The Rebbe says in Order 28, based on what we learned before in Order 20, which I also explained before, that so from Espeneach says that by Midyon, even by Midyonim, being that there are children from Keturah, who is a wife of Abraham, they have a din of if they is Gayer, they are Yisraelim Limafreya. The Balak says, according to this, you can say that Zimri does not hold this svara legabe midyan al kaponim. Why legabe midyan only? Because his title was Bas Yisri miyitir al kol. Didn't just say a geyeris miyitir al kol, Bas Yisri. So kaponim, even if you will say that's pshat l'chayid in the ha'orah, even if you go and say he does hold of that svara, that Giyeris, Sama Giyeris goes back to Mafreya, the Gabba Midian didn't agree with it. Therefore, his time was, how did you marry Bas Yisrael Midyanis? And the second question, why Moshe Rabbeinu didn't answer it, nobody answered it, is based on what we're going to learn later on in Sivov. Siv Dalet, the Rebbe continues further. L'cha'ira, what me can verempferen, that the questions could be answered with the Mame Chazal. Chazal sagen, as Gimel Dvarim also Moshe medaite, the Hiskim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Moshe did something on his own, and the Eibishter was maskim. Was ein for the was Pirish Menishim. One of the three things is that he separated himself from his wife. Separated from himself means that he divorced her. Over Mela, he should not stop containing for Basi Samira Tiralacha. Mit seinem Misse von Gieres Lakein. Weil Moshe Rabbeinu hat sich Pirish gegeben bei Ishte. Und Gott, that Prisha alleine sich hätte nicht genug erlaubt zu nehmen, dem Isse von Gieres Lakein. A Kohen is not allowed to be married to a Kohen, not only live with her, especially not allowed to be married. So Pirish Menisha enough is not itself, that has separated himself from her, is still not enough. So the Rebbe says, Zogt Chaber Rashi, Bepurusha Lateda from Posig, in Seif Pashas Baleis Rashi explains what the Daber Miriam, Al-Eidus HaIsha, Ki Isha Kushis Lokach. Rashi says, Aedis Isha, Aledis Girusheho. Kiri Isha Kushis Lokach, Va'ata Girusha. Das heißt, in other words, Rashi learned, I said, nicht nur Pirash Mina Isha. It's not only just separated, Rashi bringt that up there, Pirisha Bi Alma, just separated, but he remained married. Because that would not be enough, because the Isa L'Kein Gadol is to be married to it. It's not only the Indian from living together with her. No, it says, given a gerish. That was actually a gerish, as the Rebbe brings also in the 34. Taisha says the same thing. That's all get. So therefore, being that Moshe Rabbeinu separated himself and divorced her, so there's no makasha. How Moshe Rabbeinu was living with a gerusha. He's not living with a gieris. He's not living with a gieris. He's divorced. So that would take care of the first question. The question was, how did Moshe Rabbeinu do it? He took a divorce once he became a king. Von deswegen, hat uns aber nicht geämpft zu Zimri. Why wasn't it told to Zimri when er gefragt by Sisri Miktilcho? It's a legit, very good answer. He divorced the Dacke. Weil wir wurden Chazal hat keiner von dem nicht gewusst. Nobody knew about the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu separated and divorced her. Bis als sich Miriam hat sich davon gewusst, erst wenn Eldad dem Edet misnamen machen. Und Zipera hat gesagt, oilinische Seim Shalom. Even Miriam also found out about it only when she heard it from Eldad Medet from Zipera, when Eldad Medet was saying, were saying the Nevuah. If so, what's the reason why it wasn't told? Because he did it on his own. That's what the Rabbi started bringing. That Moshe also meditated his kima kodesh, but he did it in Daite. But the sign the kind all of me being they were so humble. They nicht gewollt, they still the fun business. They didn't want anybody to know what he did on his own, and they even agreed with it. Und mein Time hat es nicht euch nicht gewollt empfen, Zimni, das bin ich mir nicht. They didn't want to tell it. So that would answer both questions. The Moshe Rabbeinu and Taka separated. So the question is, how did he remain married? So he did not. And secondly, why wasn't told to Zimri? Because Moshe Rabbeinu was very humble. He didn't want to say that. That says in the order 30, the Rebbe says. And in the order 39, the Rebbe says. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu didn't say it. Why did Miriam, once she found out, why did she say it? It's because Miriam got punished for even talking about it. So she's even going to go talk further. So because she Miriam, so they don't want to be punished even more. But the Rebbe of the Beer is an issue. This explanation does not make sense. While, first of all, in the brackets, the Rebbe says, "Neisib of them was Rashi learned it is free. I may shot the page give a manisha nish medite. No vala marti l'chol the frish minaisha." As it says in the pasuk, "Va'at beya medimodi." So, in other words, Moshe Rabbeinu did not do it on his own. He did it because the Eibishter told him to do it. If so, the Eibishter told him to do it. When es ist nicht kein Hepech an Nives zu erzählen, als mes mekayim na tzivu von dem Eibishter Hashem. If so, the Eibishter told him he should have said it because it's not a union from Gaiva or Nives. If a person does what the Eibishter says, a person puts on film, a Gaiva that says to put on film. Besides this, the Rebbe goes on, is the Sibah from Perishas Meshim and Aisha, even without this, what the Rebbe says in the brackets, but that's Sibah, even if you're going to say that it's because he did it on his own, the Sibah from Perishas Meshim and Aisha Zochman, as says the Father says, given a Novi. That's what Rashi says, I bring it up. I say, Gizok oil in the Shasayim Shalelu, Imain Miskokim Linevuashi Perishim Minishasayim. Just like my husband separated himself from me because he's a Novi. So Rachman Sabdem, because they're saying Nevuah, they're gonna have to lose they're gonna have to lose their husbands. So in other words, the reason is because of Nevuah. No, the reason is based on Pianal. If you're going to say that this is because the Geyeris Lekain, you have to divorce him because of the Isser, not because get a Nevuah, because of a Navi. And the Rebbe says in more 44 that if it's on the Tzivi for Atapeh, I made the body, that means in other words, without the Tzivi, he would not separate himself. What do you mean? Why the Tzivi? Why would not separate himself? Tzivi is on because of what? Because of Nevuah. Because he's going to speak the Rebbe the whole time. But here there's a Tzivi, he's okay. He's not allowed to live with him, but he's not allowed to be married to Geyeris. So we're back to the question, what is Taka the Hasbara that Moshe Rabbeinu continued on living with Tzipora if he's okay. So the Rebbe says now in Sifhei, the Bir und der. Steht in Mishnah, Iris, a Kohen Hedget, es Almona, if a Kohen Hedget engaged, make an Edison to Almona, and a Kohen Hedget is allowed to be married to Almona, when this man Ali is King Godel and they become a King Godel, and a King Godel is not allowed to marry Almon. What's the thing? The Gemara says Yichnis. The Mishnah says Yichnis. He's allowed to marry. Why? What's the Mokir? So the Gemara says, the Gemara learned this off from the Pasuk Yikach Isha. It says, Kim Sula mi Amov Yikach Isha. That a King Godel has to take a psula and is also balmona from the word it says in the posik yikachisha. As we bow der yikachisha, the erasure in the kinyan, the king which is made in the beginning, the kedushin, the erasure. About that the erasure in the given beheten. Ebazei mu megel chatchila and the kindle kichon ken is on the other. Being that it started at beheten, so the kain, even the kain gadol, is allowed to continue on and finish up the erasure and make it nesur. If so, the Rebbe says, it is a kolshke bekalachem benidin the dan by Moshe Rabbeinu, but not the erasure. Not only is erasure to tzepera, nor ich the nesuyin, so the given beheten. Even the nesuyin was also done beheten. He not only was ma'adas sokedim matan Torah, he did it even the nesuyin, right? Was before matan Torah. As ich noch dem be Moshe's geworden akein is basise given mutereslei, chodji is given a yeres. If so, we can say simple. That's the reason, because being that he married her before he became a Kohen, therefore now he becomes a Kohen, just like a Kohen Hedyet becomes a Kohen Gadol, is allowed to finish off the marriage to this Almana. The same thing is also legabe Moshe Rabbeinu, that being that he married her, not only Morristown, he married her before Matan Torah, therefore he's allowed to continue on to live with her after he became a Kohen Gadol, or a Kohen. The Chelek came and flagging up them. The Rabbi continues on and said, das was Moshe hat Chassan gehabt mit Zepera beheter, in der das given far Matan Torah. He married her way before Matan Torah. Und na yes as Eden haben damit gehabt der Din von Bnei Neach. Before Matan Torah had the Din in Neach. Und sie ist dann überhaupt nicht gewähnt der Gather full Halakiche von noch Matan Torah. The whole concept of Kiche, which happened after Matan Torah, was never in existence before Matan Torah. As the Rebbe brings it down in the beginning of Order 48, the Rambam says, "Koydem Matan Torah, hoye odem pagei isha b'shuk, machnisa letech beisei." Even without the whole concept of kedushin, without the whole concept of erasure, went to nesuyin lechatchila. Give me shenit noter and it's tabi Yisrael yikna oisa tchila. That he had to calls Matan Torah and says that it has to be a niyam from lekuchin from this from erasure from kedushin before the marriage. If so, back to the plan, being that before Matan Torah there was no concept of lekicha, no concept of kedushin, muss man doch sagen, if so, when most Matan Torah came, and then it says you have to have an inyan from erasure before the nesuyin, muss man doch sagen, as noch Matan Torah, the Hobayiden gedav zayin mechodosh kedushin or lekicha the nishaseim al pi Torah. If so, every one of the Yidden had to remarry his wife in order to make the nesuyin, the kedushin before the erasure and before the nesuyin. If so, if everybody had to do it over again, back to the question: what are you telling me that Moshe Rabbeinu married her before he became a Kohen Gadol? No, he had to remarry her once he became a Kohen. Once it was meaning for Matan Torah. If he had to remarry her again after Matan Torah, was it possible for him to remarry her again to be Mekadesher noch Matan Torah if he's a Kohen? So the Rebbe goes on. He says, "Kinkashenish. This is not a kasha. While, first of all, the Rebbe says like this: Neisiv of them was the naile kiche doch zichig ben tekef lachem Matan Torah. If they had to make a new marriage, it was done right after Matan Torah. Ubemela, but negeit sumesha, it was either geworden akeim b'mei hamenuluyim noch hakomas hamishkon. So if so, by Moshe Rabbeinu, it happened right away by after Matan Torah, which was almost a year before hakomas hamishkon. And therefore, it was more than so. Therefore, he remarried her before he became a Kohen. He said, on them as like the day as Moshe Kol Yom of Kohen. Even if you're going to say that, according to that opinion, that Moshe Rabbeinu was all his life a Kohen, which would mean also that not only B'Shivas Yimei HaMeluim, so it has nothing to do with the Mishkan. If so, you could say that his kahuna started right by Matan Torah. And if it started right by Matan Torah, the first minute after Matan Torah, he was already a Kohen. He was not allowed to remarry her again. Continues on that even if you're going to say that Moshe Rabbeinu was all his life a Kohen, therefore it began right in the beginning, right after Matan Torah. Therefore, he had no way to remarry her again. is also echet in kasha. This is still not a kasha because vayelech posik vayelech ish mebeis Levi vayikach es bas Levi. Darshan the Gemara she also lo ma'aseh lekuchim, that Amram did a ma'aseh lekuchim. What does it mean? He did a ma'aseh lekuchim. Was the pshat in them is as Amram hat hier mekadish given mit a lekuchim von noch Matan Torah. In other words, even though this was before Matan Torah, nevertheless, what Amram did with Bas Levi was he made the Ma'aseh HaKedushin from after Matan Torah. But der Mitzvah Meforshim, der Agichober Masbin, was der Rambam sagt, says in der Rambam, der Rambam gesprochen, der ist mit sein, aber Mitzrayim nitztava Amram b'mitzvah Yisraelis. Was noch ist nicht moving, as the Meforshim al-Asar is, wo findet man als nitztava Amram b'mitzvah Yisraelis? Now the Agichober says, no, das ist die Mitzvah von Kiddushin, was ist in gewähnt in Mitzrayim. In other words, that even though Matan Torah was not yet given, there was a tzivui from the Eibishter in Mitzrayim, and this is what all the Eden did. And that comes what Amram was in Tztava, that they should do the Ma'aseh HaKedushin, the Ma'aseh HaLekich. If so, if we bow, dass ich fahre Matan Torah, and the Kedushin Isha given by Eden in an Eifen von Lekicha von noch Matan Torah. In other words, it started already in a certain sense before Matan Torah. As the Rebbe says in Ha'aret 57, Al Pezeh, you must say the Lashon of the Rambam, Kimishe nit no Torah and Tztabi Yisrael, is Lavdavke, because there was Tzivuyim from the Eibishter, also before Matan Torah, Al Derech Moshel, where it says over here in Mitzrayim, that Amram was Nitztave to do the Inyan from Kil, Ma'aseh HaLekich from Kedushin. The Spalter says from Matan Torah is by Kedushin Ish by Eden given and Eifel von nach Matan Torah. If so, hat das nicht gedacht sein an ein Kedushin noch Matan Torah, because the Friedike du Kedushin sind geblieben mit Topfam ich noch Matan Torah. Only Fizer, Rabbi concludes, is moving as the Yikach Isha from Moshe Rabbeinu is given beheter. For why was it beheter? Spalter es ist given far Matan Torah. Und hat Spalter nicht gedacht noch einmal, man kann es sein noch Matan Torah, because what he did before Matan Torah, before he became a Kohen, but what he did was a Ma'aseh Lekicha, Ma'aseh HaKedushin, and that remains even after Matan Torah, and therefore he did not have to remarry her again, and therefore he was allowed to continue on being with her. Before we go further to the Hemshech HaSicha, I just want to point out something which is discussed in many ha'ores and so on concerning this word from the Rebbe over here. That we have to understand what does the Rebbe say? Being that, but Amram was nitztave to do what? The act, the Ma'aseh Lekuchin. B'meila, if it wasn't nitztave on this remains also later on. B'meila, it doesn't have to redo it again. In so many sikhs, the Rebbe explains that Matan Torah was mavatal all the mitzvahs and all the tzivuyim from beforehand. Chelek ches, Pashas Nosoi, the many sikhs. If so, everybody they discuss in a lot of these orders. What does it help that Amram was nitztava? If the kasha is once Matan Torah, everything, all the tzivuyim and everything from before was nizbatel and starts anew. So if so, he also the Ma'aseh Lekuchin, which he did before, even though it was that tzivui Hakadosh Baruch Hu, that tzivui the Hakadosh Baruch Hu, still he should have to redo it again. Concerning the Mashal Mitzvah's Mila, so the Rebbe explains that the reason why Avram waited was because once he does it, he can't redo it again. But Ili Yitzuri would be able to redo it again. He would have done earlier. And the only thing he can't redo it again. Over here, why can't he do it again? This is a Ma'aseh Kedushin, give a Kedushin again. So what's the problem over here? What's the Hasbar over here? And there's a lot of They'll pull them around and around. I just want to say one short word. It could be his nishu gehalten, but it makes it much lighter, much easier. The Maisa lekuchin, the Rebbe is also the Maisa lekuchin. The Rebbe is mekatim lekuchin for noch matnatera. What's the lekuchin for matnatera? The lashon Rambam means that the kimish nit matera. So the Torah was the Nsava Sheyikna Oisatchim. Rabbi brings down the 148. Lashon say Tzibur Yo Lekuchen is the Meister Lekuchen is the Kinyan. As the Gemara discussed at the beginning of Masechta Kiddushin. The Lashon of there's a Kiddushin and there's also in your Meister Kinyan. Once you made the Kinyan and you were not stable to make that Kinyan. So the issue belongs to you now. It becomes a Maisa Kinyan, and you are kind of the issue. You can't kind of a thing which belongs to you. So if you're kind of before, because the tzivur of the Eibishter to Amram, that he should do the Maisa Lekicha, Maisa Kedushin, which is a inyan from Lekicha, which is a inyan from a Kinyan. So Ibazay, you can't be kind of again. It's Matan Torah was mevatel the tzivuyim. The mitzvahs. The mitzvah from Matan Torah is bechlal not together of the mitzvahs which before Matan Torah. Doesn't penetrate begashmi is all the chalukim that I explained in many of the decisions. But it doesn't mean to say that it comes in Matan Torah. Therefore, everything that everybody was kind with the kinyan from before Matan Torah, he has to be kind again. Let's not talk about the kiddush. Person only bought something for somebody else, he has to be kind again because now the Torah gives the kinyanim. And before the kinyan was not together with the Torah. It's two different things. Evazei is yesh leman as the kiddushin, being that this is a Maisa Kinyan, as the Rebbe brings from the Rambam, that she yikna oisat chil, that's taich of a kiddushin. So the taich is being that the Amram was commanded that he should make that Kinyan. So Bepashtis he did it in a oifen from a Kinyan. So B'meila it's his. Once it's his, there's no point in doesn't make sense to be koina again. So even after Matan Torah, this is a thing that still belongs to him. But that's Asbara. Why Moshe Rabbeinu did not have to remarry her again, make Kiddushin again, because Bapashtis, it's his already. He bought her beforehand. He made the Maisakin Lekuchin. He made the Maisakin beforehand. That Maisakin remains forever. Raised for later after also. But Melee, we bowed back to what the Rebbe says in the Sikha. We bowed that the Isur of a Gieris is only Isur from by the Kain Gadol. By the Kain Hedjich and also became Kain Gadol. Is Misad says who Isur b'Salah Yikach the Kiyikach Isha. It was over here also. Being that he did the Maisa Lekicha before him, therefore Moshe Rabbeinu is allowed to be with her as well. This l'chayre yesh lema v'derech efsher that would be a shtickle beer over here, a thing which was discussed in many hard. So let's go on further. Der mit sivov, der mit came a masbe sein. Was is given the time von Zimri pasisia mit lecho, and base for was Moshe hat ihm gar nicht geämpft auf sein Teil. And the Rebbe says, Zimri hat nicht gehalten von der Lafusse von Teresh Balak von Yikachishana. All based on this cloud of the word Yikach. That once you do the Yikach, you made a Maisa Kicha, you can finish it all off. Balak is kama Moshe Rabbeinu that not only did the Yikach, he actually did the Kiddushin itself. If the Nesuin itself, he doesn't have to be separated. Okay. B'meile, he bowed, as Yisrei, Zimri didn't hold of this water, of this drosha of Yikach. Only Shitoshi, at Moshe Rabbeinu, you must Megarish sein, Bas Yisrael. If according to him, Evazei, Moshe Rabbeinu had to divorce her because Evazei is not allowed to be married with her anymore because he doesn't hold the drosha for Teresh Bapeh for Yikachisha. This whole thing is based on a drosha. What's the pshat in Yikachisha? Moshe hat nicht gekannt, empfer im Limud von Yikachisha. Moshe couldn't answer it, weil der Din is, als Tam Kochen was in Mere Halacha. Und is negebe dabar is nicht begleit b'shas Moshe zu sagen kach gebalti. The halacha is that if it's negate to him, if he never explained it before him, and Rebbe said before the story was negate to him, now it's negate to him to defend himself. He says this is the way I'm coming. He's not believed. Und Moshe doch gewinnt, and I gave it over, because Bas Yisrael, mir tira l'cho. But mainly, he was not able to defend, so now we understand both things. Zimri didn't hold up the whole drosha. So Bamela come to him, he had to divorce Bas Yisrael, and Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't answer it because he was the gay bedova. Just a little ha'ora in the Rebbe says over here, the Gabi Taina Zimri. The Rebbe says Zimri hat nicht gehalten von die Alfusse von Teresh Bapeh von Yikach Isha Anal. Only Shitosei hat Moshe gemusst megarish sein Bas Yisrael. If we follow everything that goes in the Sikh over here, the shaila is not Legabi the megarish sein. The shaila is Legabi the fact how he's allowed to do remarriage. The shaila was before, if you don't hold this for of Yikach Isha, that the Kiddushin which he made L'chatchila is and result of that, the Kiddushin which he made L'chatchila remains for later. If he doesn't hold the drosha, so he had to remarry her. So Moshe had to remarry her because he never did this Ma'aseh L'kicha. So the time for Zimri is not that Shitosi you had to divorce her. The Shitosi the Shaila is how did you remarry her? You're not allowed to remarry her. Okay, this is not how to do it. Al der Rebbe continues on. Al der wie wir sehen es bei Machlekes Kera, was zusammen mit seinen Kriegen auf Kunas Harim, ist echt gekommen mit falschen Teilen des Schals wegen der Mezuzah. Bei Shumal Svarim, Ma'oshich beim Mezuzah und Cheles Tal und Cheles Matri bekommen Tzitzis und wir finden nicht am meisten soll die Schals empfangen mit der Limit für Teresh Bapeh. Why not? Weil er hat noch gesagt, wie Bria Yivra Hashem is the Hasbara Canal. Moshe is better than the Gebedaba because the Machlekes of Korach was against Moshe Rabbeinu. On the far, of the Saibin, we nicht given Baglebt of them, so therefore he didn't even bother answering. But mainly, this is the Hasbara. Legabi over here also, why they were not, Zimri's tinus was not addressed. Rebbe finishes off the Hera for Nina now. Nicht allemal sucht man zu empfern jenem auf seine Scheiles. Amol ist jener Gott äußern mit seinen Scheile zu Mathe seiner Manjones. Wenn sein Kavone ist, L'Shem Shemayim, darf sein an Exil gewaltig. Wenn fragt, ob die Libertäre mit der Kavone zu Mathe machen, das ist der Asse, dann darf sein die Anoge von Altan Exil gewaltig. Der Weg zu benazir sein Asamen der Tere ist nicht durch Schachel Tare, nur mit dem Tekev, was ist Lamailo mit Tambadas. Und als wie ist bei jeder und bei sich, wenn der Melech Socken und Xil, der jetzt heute kommt mit Walbel sein, darf man sich nicht reinlassen in der Schachel Tare mit ihm, man darf sein gleich Ton mit der Tekev und Schele besser mit. Das ist sicher, gewähnt die Anoge von Pinchas Bekanis Genossi. Hat sich nicht reingelassen in der Schachel Tare, weil aber der Ding ist, als wohl ihm ein Meinung legt. No, that kann ich wenn Kinder Shem Tzvois, Kinesi, Kinos, und sich messen wenn nefesh werden zu hargenen sind. Sie fräst der Chag Gehola, von den Beis Gimel Tammuz, es habe immer schon mit der Woche Pashas Balak, und der Ingen Anal Shachas der Chag Gehola. Der Anoge von dem Rebbe der Balak was Simcha, ist gewinnen Eifen Bekanis Kinossi. Nicht gucken dich auf die Teilnis von gewissen Menschen, als es nicht auch gechiert, sich ein bisschen nefesh sein, Kolzad Bishal Becholu, ist beim Balak was Simcha gewinnt, Bekanis Kinossi. Wie bald, es ist dem Ebersten Sazach, Kinossi, hat sich noch ernannt, mit dem Nefesh gemein bepeilen, verabotzt Satere bei Jahres. Wenn sie das Nefesh gesagt kann man fangen, und mit ihm. Alle Bepasche sehen und nicht durch den Nossi Ader. Der Nossi Ader gewinnt Meishe. In einem Eifen von Gewurre. Was der Pfarrer gefindt man als Pinchas Hualiau, hat dieser Bekanis Kinossi oder Shem Hashem Tzvoketz, und hat nicht gefunden als Russafiten. Beis wird beim Balagole Bekanis Kinossi, der Nossi Ader allein. Aber es kann man sagen, als euch bei Pinchas sind, denn es sind das Kreach auf dem Kaniknossi Confirmation Nossi Ader. Durch sein Sorgen mit Kreinde der Igrse Iwe Laue Parvanka, hat gegeben Pinchas im Kirche Mekanis sein Kindes Hashem. In der Nähe von Chassodim, wie erzählt, steht viel Mal, als Balagole war Simcha, hat gebeten, sein Vater im Rebnisch muss reden, als eine Sie, so sein Bechesel gebrachmim, der Uftu, als euch der Linie von Bekanis Kinossi, wird durchgefügt in einer Nähe von Tev Ein, wo ihr Werach, Bechesed, Oberach.